She didn't even see it coming. 1 second, Imani Brooks was doing her job moving quietly, through a crowd of people who would never learn her name. The next second, a hand connected with her face so hard, she went down on the marble floor in front of 300 strangers. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. A woman in a $40,000 gown stood over her champagne, dripping from a ruined dress, and looked down at Imani the way you look at something you've accidentally stepped in. And Imani lay there, ears ringing, thinking only one thing: Micah needs me to get back up. If that had been you on that floor, your dignity stripped away in front of the most powerful people in this city, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if this kind of story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next is something none of us saw coming. The Bellamy Crown Hotel did not belong to the world Imani Brooks came from. She knew that the moment she walked through the service entrance on Michigan Avenue, past the valet stands and the idling black cars and the men in suits, who never once looked at the people carrying trays. The hotel belonged to another species entirely, one that measured worth in square footage and zip codes, and the casual way they said the names of places Imani had only ever read about. She had worked 3 of these events before. Charity galas, they called them. The word charity always struck her as interesting, given that the people attending had spent more on their outfits than most families she knew earned in a year. But she wasn't there for the irony. She was there for the $280 that the catering agency would deposit into her account by Friday morning. $280. That was what a night of her back and her feet and her silence cost. She needed every cent. Micah had been on dialysis for 14 months. Her brother was 15 years old, and 3 times a week, machines cleaned his blood because his kidneys had forgotten how. She still remembered the doctor's voice the first time he explained it calm and practiced, like he had delivered this particular sentence so many times it had lost its weight for him. It had not lost its weight for Imani. She had sat in that sterile office chair and felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Their parents had died in a car accident on the I-90 3 years ago. A semi-drifted lanes on a wet November morning, and by noon, Imani was an orphan at 25 with a 12-year-old brother who still had glow-in-the-dark stars on his bedroom ceiling. She never took them down. The dialysis had come 8 months later, creeping in like a second disaster. The insurance fights were ongoing. The bills were not theoretical. They arrived in envelopes that Imani opened standing at the kitchen counter, always alone, always after Micah had gone to sleep, so he wouldn't see her face when she read the numbers. A living donor had finally been found 6 weeks ago. A genuine match confirmed twice. The transplant was possible. Micah could have a real kidney, a real life, basketball again, loud music again, arguments about what to eat for dinner again. All Imani needed was money she did not have. So she was here, in a navy uniform that was half a size too tight across the shoulders, carrying a tray of champagne flutes through a crowd of people who looked through her like glass. She was good at this job. Not because she loved it, she didn't, but because she was precise and she was quiet, and she had learned early how to read a room. Which guests were on their 3rd drink? Which ones were looking for an exit? Which ones would flag her down by snapping their fingers without making eye contact? She had the particular skill of invisible competence. People like her always did. The ballroom was extraordinary in the way that expensive things always are not warm, exactly, but overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers that caught the light and threw it everywhere. Tables draped in white linen so stiff it seemed architectural. Floral arrangements taller than Imani's head, full of flowers she couldn't name. Somewhere, a string quartet played something she almost recognized. She moved through it all carefully, efficiently, her tray balanced with the kind of muscle memory that comes from doing something 100 times. She smiled when smiled at. She said, of course, and right away, and my pleasure in the tone she had practiced warm, but not familiar, helpful but not present. Then Celeste Whitmore stepped backward without looking. It happened in the space of half a second. Imani had been turning to offer champagne to a man on her left, And Celeste, in the middle of throwing her head back, laughing at something her companion had said, stepped directly into the path of the tray. Their bodies made contact. The tray tilted. 2 flutes went over. Champagne cold, carbonated, expensive splashed across the lower half of Celeste Whitmore's ivory gown. Celeste's laugh died instantly. She turned. And Imani's first thought, shamefully, she's even more beautiful up close. The kind of beauty that comes wrapped in money and maintenance cheekbones, like something sculpted, blonde hair that moved like it was lit from within, a dress that probably cost more than 4 months of dialysis copays. She was the kind of woman who filled a room just by standing in it. Her second thought was, she's going to blame me. What did you just do? Celeste's voice was quiet. That was the first warning sign. People who are quietly furious are always more dangerous than people who are loud. I'm so sorry, Imani said immediately, and she meant it, even though she had been watching Celeste step backward into her path. She had the tray steady. Celeste's movement had caused this. But none of that mattered. Let me get someone to help with. You just ruined a $45,000 gown. The words landed in the small radius around them, like something dropped from a height. The 2 people nearest to Celeste stopped their own conversation. A server 3 feet away froze. Imani kept her voice level. I'm truly sorry, Miss Whitmore. I'll get the manager so we can't. I don't want your manager. Celeste looked at her then. Not the polite looking through that most guests did. She actually looked at Imani, took her in from the uniform, to the shoes, to the tray still in her hands. And then something shifted behind her eyes. Something deliberate. What's your name? Imani. Imani. She let the name sit for a moment like she was tasting it and finding it unsatisfying. Do you have any idea where you are? You are at the Crown Gala. There are people in this room whose charitable donations fund hospitals. Imani. They fund entire wings of hospitals. They are here tonight to help people less fortunate than themselves. A beat. People like you. The quiet around them had grown. Imani could feel it expanding, table by table, the way sound drops when something tightens in the air. More faces turning, more bodies going still. Her tray was still in her hands. She gripped it to keep them from shaking. I understand, she said quietly. And I'm sorry for the no. Celeste stepped closer. I don't think you do understand. Because someone who understood would not be standing here in my face with a pathetic little apology while I'm wearing this. She gestured at the champagne-stained fabric with open contempt. Look at you. Look at what you're standing there in. You stumble around a room you don't belong in, and then you smile at me like that's enough. The room was fully watching now. Imani could hear it in the silence, that particular held-breath quality that a crowd gets when it senses spectacle. She kept her eyes on Celeste's face, not because she felt strong, because she knew that if she looked at the watching faces, she would fall apart. I didn't stumble, she said, carefully. You stepped back. It was the wrong thing to say. She knew it as soon as it left her mouth. Not because it was untrue. It was completely true. But truth, in rooms like this, is not always protection. Celeste's expression shifted. The careful performance of outrage cracked open, and something raw came through real rage, maybe, or wounded pride, or something worse. She looked at Imani the way Imani had seen certain people look at things they wanted to destroy, simply because they could. What did you just say to me? I said. The slap came without warning. Not a dramatic movie slap, wide and telegraphed. A short, sharp motion, the back of Celeste's hand connecting with Imani's left cheek, with enough force that Imani's head snapped sideways. The champagne tray left her grip. Glass hit marble. The sound was enormous, in the silence a crack, and then a cascade flutes shattering across the floor in every direction. Imani went down. Her hip hit first, then her palm, and she was on the ballroom floor with champagne soaking into her uniform and broken glass around her, and 300 people looking at her from above, and the music, she only now noticed, had completely stopped. Her cheek burned, her ears were ringing. The chandelier light above her was very bright. She thought, absurdly, I'm on the floor. And then get up. Get up. Micah needs you to get up. She pressed her palm against the marble and pushed herself upright. slowly. Her knee ached where it had caught the edge of a glass fragment. Her face was hot. She got to one knee, then both feet. Celeste had not moved. She was standing 3 feet away, chest rising and falling, the ruined gown glittering with champagne droplets. Her face had gone back to composed, like what had just happened was simply the correct outcome of events. The crowd had not moved either. Not one person. Not the manager who had appeared from somewhere to Imani's left. Not the security staff she could see near the doors. Nobody. In Imani's experience, crowds moved in 2 directions, away from trouble, or toward it when there was something to gain. This crowd was doing neither. They were simply watching. 300 wealthy, powerful, influential people, and not one of them moved to help. That was the part that would stay with her the longest. Not the slap, not the floor, the stillness of all those people. Then she heard footsteps, not hurried, not running. Deliberate, measured, unhurried. The kind of footsteps that belong to someone who has never once needed to rush toward anything, because the world rearranges itself before they arrive. She felt the crowd shift before she saw him. Lucian Graves was not a tall man by the standards of rooms like this one. He was perhaps 6'1", built with the kind of leanness that comes from controlled discipline rather than youth. He wore a black suit with the ease of someone who had never once thought about what he was wearing. He had dark hair, a face that was angular in the way of things that have been tested and held, and eyes so dark they registered as black in most lighting. He was 35 years old, and he looked like every year of it had been deliberately chosen. He was also, every person in that room knew, the most dangerous man in Chicago. Not in the political sense, not in the financial sense, though he was very much that too, in the other sense. The kind of danger that city journalists referenced in careful language, unnamed sources, alleged connections, significant and expanding real estate holdings that always seemed to survive scrutiny. The kind of man around whom other powerful men became very careful with their words. He crossed the ballroom with his hands in his pockets and his face completely still. He walked past 3 tables of senators. He walked past 2 men Imani would later learn were federal judges. He walked past a technology billionaire who had been about to say something, and very deliberately did not. He stopped in front of Imani. He looked at her cheek, at the champagne on her uniform, at the broken glass still scattered across the marble around her feet. Then he looked at Celeste. Celeste's composure, which had just been impenetrable, cracked at the edges. The first real emotion Imani had seen from her, something complicated. Something that might have been love, or the habit of love, or fear wearing love's face. Lucian, her voice was different now, softer, appealing. This girl knocked champagne all over my don't. His voice was not raised. It was not angry in any theatrical way. It was simply a door closing. Don't finish that sentence. Celeste closed her mouth. Lucian turned back to Imani. Up close, his eyes were not blank the way she expected. There was something working behind them: assessment, calculation, and something else she couldn't name. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person they are genuinely trying to see. Can you stand? He asked. I'm standing, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Are you hurt? She thought about the burning in her cheek, the ache in her knee, the way her whole body wanted to shake and couldn't. Not here, not in front of all these people. I'm fine. You're not fine, he said matter-of-factly. But you're standing, and that's not nothing. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a handkerchief, white folded, the kind people actually used, and offered it to her. She looked at it for a moment before taking it. She pressed it to her cheek. It came away with a small red smear where the edge of a ring had caught her skin. Lucian looked at that smear for a long moment. Then he turned back to Celeste, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that only the 3 of them, and perhaps the 4 nearest people, could hear it. We're done, he said. Celeste stared at him. What? You and I, whatever this has been. He glanced once at the handkerchief in Imani's hand. We're done, Lucian. You cannot be serious right now. I don't make announcements twice. The silence that followed was geological. Celeste's face went through several things: disbelief, fury, humiliation. Something that looked briefly like grief, before landing on a cold, rigid version of itself. She looked at Imani once more. The look was a promise. Then she turned and walked away, and the crowd parted for her like water. Lucian turned to the hotel manager, who had materialized somewhere to their left. He spoke briefly. The words full compensation and immediate, and tonight made it across the ambient noise. The manager nodded, pale, and disappeared. Then Lucian looked back at Imani. "There's a medical staff suite on the 4th floor," he said. "They'll look at your face. I told you, I know what you told me." He paused. "I'm asking you to let someone check it anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the crowd was beginning to breathe again, shifting, murmuring, the string quartet tentatively resuming, slow and neutral. The ballroom was pretending the last 4 minutes had not happened. "Why did you do that?" she asked. It was a real question. She genuinely did not know. Men like this did not cross ballrooms for women like her. The math of this room did not add up to that outcome. Lucian considered the question for a moment, and she had the odd sense that he was actually thinking about it rather than preparing a performance. "Because nobody else was going to," he said. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't what she would have expected from a man who clearly knew how to construct a sentence. But it had the specific weight of something that was simply, unambiguously true. She handed him back his handkerchief. "Keep it," he said. She put it in her uniform pocket, and she let him walk her to the elevator. And she did not think about the eyes following them, or what any of them were thinking, or what it meant that the most dangerous man in Chicago had just ended a relationship over a woman, whose name he hadn't even asked yet. She thought about Micah. She thought about dialysis at 7 in the morning, 2 days from now. She thought about the number in her savings account. That was still not enough. The elevator doors closed. Lucian Graves stood beside her in the small, mirrored space and looked straight ahead and said nothing. She looked at their reflection, his suit, her stained uniform, his handkerchief in her pocket, and thought, "This is the strangest night of my life." She had absolutely no idea. In the days that followed, that night in the ballroom would be dissected by every gossip column in Chicago. Photographs would circulate Celeste's face frozen in fury, Imani on the floor, Lucian crossing the room. Social media would generate 17 different headlines before sunrise. But none of it would be as strange as what came next. Because 3 days later, Lucian Graves would sit across from Imani Brooks in a room that smelled of expensive coffee and controlled climate, and he would tell her that he knew about Micah. He would tell her about the transplant. He would tell her the number, the full, complete, terrifying number of what Micah's care would cost. And then he would make her an offer. 6 months. That was all. 6 months of her time, her presence, and her name beside his, and Micah would never worry about a medical bill again. She would sit in that chair and feel the same thing she'd felt on the ballroom floor, the floor disappearing beneath her. And she would understand, with the particular clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, that this was the moment her life split into before and after. She just didn't know yet which side was more dangerous. 3 days after the gala, Imani sat in a chair that probably cost more than her car and tried not to let her hands shake. The office was on the 42nd floor of a building in the Loop that didn't have a sign on the outside. Just glass and steel and the kind of architectural confidence that says, "We don't need to tell you who we are." The view behind Lucian Graves' desk was the entire city Lake Michigan, flat and gray to the east, the skyline stacking up around it like something that had grown rather than been built. Lucian sat across from her with a single sheet of paper between them and his hands folded on the desk. He looked exactly the same as he had in the ballroom. That was the first thing she noticed. No performance of casual warmth to soften the meeting, no small talk about the weather or how she was feeling. He had the manner of a man who considered time a finite resource and treated it accordingly. "You had it reviewed," he said. "It wasn't a question." Every line. She had taken the contract to a lawyer she found through the paralegal assistant's office on Wabash, a woman named Denise Park, who worked pro bono 3 mornings a week and who had read the 12 pages. With the focused quiet of someone diffusing something. Denise had looked up afterward and said, "It's binding. It's specific. And whoever drafted this has done it before. Then she'd said, the compensation clause is ironclad. If he breaches it, you could take everything he owns. Then she'd looked at Imani and said, the question is whether you trust that he won't. Imani had not answered that question then. She wasn't sure she could answer it now. And Lucian said, and I have questions. He spread one hand slightly, open palm. Go ahead. You know about Micah's transplant, his donor. The cost breakdown. She kept her voice even. That's not public information. His medical records are sealed. So how do you know? Lucian didn't flinch. I have people who find things. That's not an answer. It's an honest one. He paused. I needed to understand your situation before I approached you. I wasn't going to make an offer to someone who might walk away from it in a week because the terms stopped being convenient. So you investigated me. Yes. She had expected some softening of that. Some apology wrapped in justification. She didn't get one. And strangely, the directness made her feel something closer to respect than outrage, though she wasn't about to tell him that. Why me? She asked. Specifically, you could find 100 women to do this. Women who already know how to move in these rooms. Women who'd be better at it. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not emotion, exactly. More like the adjustment of someone recalibrating. That's precisely why it's you, he said. She waited. My organization has a problem, he said. Someone inside it is moving information to people who want to take what I've built. I don't know who yet. What I do know is that whoever it is has been watching everyone close to me for months. My lawyers, my security team, my business associates. Anyone I bring in from my existing circle is already compromised or suspected. He looked at her steadily. You have no connection to any of it. You are, from their perspective, an inexplicable choice, which means they'll watch you, but they won't expect you to matter. The words landed flat and honest and slightly cruel in the way that purely practical things sometimes are. You want them to underestimate me, she said. I want them to ignore you, he said. While you're paying attention. She looked at the contract between them. At the number at the bottom of the compensation clause. At Micah's name, spelled correctly, in a subsection titled Medical Obligations Unconditional. Unconditional. Regardless of outcome. Regardless of whether the arrangement ended early or ran full term. She thought about Micah sitting in the dialysis chair 3 mornings a week, with the tube in his arm and a book in his other hand, because he refused to just sit there doing nothing, and the particular way his face looked when he was trying not to show her how tired he was. She picked up the pen. She signed. Lucian watched her do it without expression. Then he signed his own copy, capped the pen, and set it down. You'll move your things to the estate by Friday, he said. My staff will help with the logistics. Micah stays where he is. For now, the medical coordinator will contact his care team directly. I want to be there for that conversation. You will be. And I want weekly updates on his account, not summaries. Actual documentation. Lucian looked at her for a moment. Done. She stood. He stood. They were both very still for a second, on opposite sides of the bed. In the 42nd floor silence. One more thing, she said. Go ahead. At the gala. You walked across that entire room. She held his gaze. You didn't know me. You didn't know my name. What was it actually about? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Celeste hit someone who was already down, he said finally. And 300 people stood there and watched like it was theater. A pause. Spent a long time around people who confuse power with permission. I'm tired of it. It wasn't the whole truth. She was experienced enough with people to know that. But it wasn't a lie either. It was a corner of something real, offered without decoration. She nodded once, picked up her bag, walked to the door. Brooks, he said. She stopped without turning around. You're going to be watched from the moment you leave this building. My people and theirs. You should know that. She thought about that for a second. About what it meant to be watched. She'd been watched her whole life as the heaviest girl in the room, as the black woman in wrong zip code, as the catering worker in the too tight uniform. She was accustomed to being seen incorrectly. Let them watch, she said, and left. The estate sat behind iron gates on the north shore of Lake Michigan, the kind of property that appeared on architectural websites without ever listing a price. Imani arrived on Friday evening in a car that Lucian's staff sent not a flashy thing, which surprised her. Just a clean dark SUV with a driver, who introduced himself as Darnell and asked exactly once if she needed to stop anywhere before they arrived. She said no. She had 2 suitcases and a box of Micah's drawings that she refused to put in storage, and a very precise understanding that she was walking into something she did not fully comprehend. The house was large. She had braced for that. What she hadn't braced for was the staff 8 people who appeared in sequence to show her things, her rooms, the kitchen protocols, the security panel in her suite, the direct line to the medical coordinator handling Micah's care, the car that was available to her at any hour. A woman named Gloria, who managed the house, showed her the last of it with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen many arrangements and made no judgments about any of them. Gloria was 60-something with the posture of a retired military officer and eyes that missed nothing. "The East Wing is Mr. Graves' private space," Gloria said, standing in the hallway outside Imani's suite. "He doesn't typically take meals before 7. He works late. He doesn't like noise before 6 in the morning." She paused. "He also doesn't like being asked how he's doing by people who don't actually want to know." Imani looked at her. "Does that happen a lot?" "More than you'd think," Gloria said. "With all kinds of people." Her eyes ran over Imani's face for a moment, not unkindly, but thoroughly. "You'll be fine here, as long as you're straight with him." "And if I'm not?" Gloria smiled for the first time, small and private. "Then you won't be here long enough for it to matter either way." She left Imani with that. Imani stood in the center of her suite with her suitcases still packed, and the lake moving gray and enormous outside her window, and she took 3 slow breaths, and she told herself, "This is for Micah. Remember what this is for." The first public appearance was 6 days later. A corporate dinner at the Langford Club, small by gala standards, perhaps 80 people, the kind of event where the conversation was quieter and sharper, and the stakes were harder to see. Lucian's assistant, a compact, watchful man named Ellis, had sent Imani 3 briefing documents in the preceding days. Guest lists, company affiliations, known allegiances, a 1-paragraph note on conversational landmines with 4 specific names. She had read all of it twice and then read it again. The dress had been selected by someone on Lucian's team, deep burgundy, tailored without being constrictive, the kind of garment that had been designed to move with a real body rather than against one. She put it on sweet and looked at her suit and looked at herself in the full-length mirror for a long moment. Not with approval or disapproval, just with the kind of assessment that tells you whether you're ready. She decided, as ready as she was going to be. Lucian was waiting at the base of the stairs. He was already dressed charcoal suit, no tie, and he was looking at something on his phone, and he didn't look up immediately when she came down. And that specific thing, the not performing attentiveness, made her trust him slightly more than she had before. When he did look up, his expression stayed level, but his eyes moved over her once, with the careful attention of someone registering information. "The briefing documents," he said. "Did you read them?" 3 times. "Conrad Sloan will be there tonight. He's your primary rival. Legitimate business cover in commercial real estate and logistics. Suspected of 3 things your attorney can't prove, and 1 thing he can but won't." She held his gaze. "Ellis is thorough." Something that was not quite amusement moved across Lucian's face. "Don't let Conrad know what you know." I wasn't planning to. "And Warren Kessler will be seated 2 tables from us. He's been my advisor for 19 years. He'll try to be friendly with you tonight." "Should I let him?" Lucian considered this. "Yes. Let him think he's getting somewhere." She filed that away. In the car, they sat beside each other without speaking for most of the drive, which should have been uncomfortable, and somehow wasn't. Lucian looked out the window. Imani went over the guest list in her head one more time. When the car stopped, he turned to her. "If something feels wrong tonight, look at me," he said. "Don't manage it yourself. Look at me first. And if you're the one who's wrong..." His jaw shifted slightly. "Then tell me directly. Don't do it in front of anyone." "Agreed," she said, and got out of the car. The Langford Club had the particular atmosphere of a place that had been impressive for a very long time and was no longer trying. Wood paneling, discreet lighting, wait staff who moved like smoke. The kind of place where the art on the walls was real, and the conversation about it was not. She felt the attention before she saw it, the particular recalibration of a room when something unexpected enters it. Heads that didn't turn all the way, but turned enough. Eyes that stayed too long. Lucian placed his hand at the small of her back lightly, without pressure as they crossed the entrance hall, and she understood the gesture for what it was. Not ownership, but placement. He was telling the room without words that she was beside him intentionally. She stood straight. She didn't smile more than was genuine. She held eye contact with the people who offered it, and she let the silence sit with the ones who didn't. Conrad Sloane found them before the first course. He was a big man, not fat, but expansive. It's the way some powerful men become in their 50s. Silver hair, worn deliberately, a face built for projected confidence, a handshake that lasted half a second too long. He looked at Imani with the specific kind of friendly interest that actually means I am cataloging you. Lucian. His voice was warm. I heard the rumors, but I didn't believe them. He turned to Imani with what was probably his most disarming smile. And you must be Imani Brooks, she said before Lucian could answer. Imani. Conrad let it sit exactly as long as Celeste had, which she noted and filed. How did you manage to escape his attention for so long? I was busy, she said pleasantly. Conrad laughed. It was a good laugh practiced, generous, designed to make you feel included. I'll bet. He looked at Lucian with eyes that were significantly less warm than his voice. She's remarkable. I can see why you're keeping her close. Lucian didn't rise to it. Conrad, enjoy your evening. He moved away, still smiling, already looking at something across the room. Imani kept her face neutral until he was out of immediate earshot. Then, quietly, to Lucian, he already knows about the contract. Lucian's hand, still at her back, pressed very slightly. Not in warning, in confirmation. Dinner itself was a chess game played in 4 courses. She watched, she listened. She let conversations move around her and through her and noticed the ones that stopped when she drew close, and the ones that didn't. She watched Warren Kessler, a compact silver-haired man in his late 60s, with the groomed pleasantness of someone's favorite uncle, and she let him approach her during the cocktail break after the main course. Warren was good. She gave him that immediately. He was warm where Conrad was calculating, specific where Conrad was broad. He asked about her in a way that felt genuinely curious, where she grew up, whether she had family in the city, what she was interested in. He didn't ask about Lucian or the arrangement, which meant he was either disciplined or strategic, and either way she needed to stay sharp. She answered his questions with the honest parts of her story that cost nothing to share. Chicago South Side. Yes. Family, yes, a brother. She watched his face when she said brother and saw nothing. No flicker, no adjustment. But when she mentioned, casually, that Micah loved basketball, something happened around Warren's eyes. Very small. Gone in under a second, she kept smiling. She kept talking. She didn't reach for it. Later, back in the car, Lucian watched her from the other side of the back seat. Tell me, he said. Warren asked about Micah. The temperature in the car changed. Not dramatically, just enough. He asked how old he was, whether he was still in school. He kept his tone completely neutral. She looked at her hands in her lap for a moment. But he already knew. He knew about Micah before I told him anything. Lucian said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the city moved past the windows. How do you know? He asked, quietly, not doubting her. Just wanting the evidence. Because when I said Micah's name, he didn't ask me to clarify which brother. I hadn't told him I only had one. The silence after that had weight. All right, Lucian said. All right, what? All right, you're more useful than I expected. He said it without inflection, which somehow made it land as a genuine thing rather than a performance of one. She looked at him. I want access to your security rotation logs for the last 6 weeks. His eyes moved to her face. That's not in the contract. No, she agreed. But you hired me to notice things. I'm noticing things, let me look. He was quiet long enough that she thought it was going to be a no. Then, I'll have Ellis send them to you tomorrow morning. The logs arrived at 7:42 the next morning, 6 weeks of security rotation schedules, redacted in several places, but not enough to obscure the pattern she was looking for. Imani sat at the small desk in her suite, with coffee going cold beside her, and went through them page by page. It took her 4 hours to find it. One security officer listed as T. Brandau in the schedule had deviated from his assigned post-rotation on 3 specific nights. Not randomly. On each of those 3 nights, something had happened. A financial document had been accessed remotely. A car had passed the estate's perimeter at an unusual hour, and a guest list for one of Lucian's private dinners had appeared in Conrad Sloane's hands before the invitations were even sent. 3 nights. 3 deviations, same officer. She circled the name. She sat back. She thought about what this meant versus what she could prove. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. She was still sitting there when her phone rang. It was the medical coordinator, a woman named Priya, who had the quick, precise speech of someone managing 12 things simultaneously. She confirmed Micah's pre-surgery consultation was scheduled. She confirmed the financing was processed. She confirmed everything was moving. Imani pressed the phone against her ear and listened to everything is moving and felt the specific, complicated sensation of being grateful for something she wasn't sure she should have accepted. She brought the security logs to Lucian that evening. He was in the room he used as a working office, not the formal one where they'd signed the contract, but a smaller one that smelled of actual use. Old coffee, paper, the particular sharpness of someone who'd been in a contained space for hours. He had his jacket off. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. There was a quality to him when he was working that was different from the performance of public spaces, something rawer and less assembled, and she thought he probably didn't let many people see it. She put the logs on the desk and pointed to the circled name. He looked at it for a long time. Brandau, he said, in the tone of someone reading a diagnosis they were not surprised by and had hoped to be wrong about. 3 nights, 3 breaches. She sat down across from him without being invited, and he didn't comment on it. I can't tell you where the information went from him. Timing matches. Lucian stood. He moved to the window. He put his hands in his pockets and looked out at the lake, which was dark and enormous at this hour. She watched the line of his shoulders and thought, he's not angry about what I found. He's angry about what it means. Brandau has been on my security team for 4 years, he said. I know. She'd seen the employment records Ellis had included. That's how they work, isn't it? They put someone close while they're still building the case for what they want. They wait. Lucian turned. Who told you that? Nobody. I'm just not naive about how people operate when they want something bad enough. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to learn, the one where he was reassessing something he thought he already knew. Don't move on Brandau yet, she said. If whoever's directing him knows he's been found, they'll go quiet and shift to someone else. We need to find the connection to Warren first. He was quiet. I said we, she acknowledged. I know that's not technically what I'm here for. No, he said. It's exactly what you're here for. He came back to the desk. He stood across from her, close enough that she could see the tiredness around his eyes, which he was very good at not wearing on his face, but which existed in the small details regardless. You found this in 4 hours. I had nothing else to do. You could have read a book. I read the logs. He made a sound that was nearly a laugh, close enough to one that she registered it. In the weeks that followed, the city noticed them. She had expected that intellectually and was not fully prepared for it in practice. The photographs started appearing outside a restaurant in River North, leaving a legal building in the loop, at a benefit concert that she had not wanted to attend and which Lucian attended without any evident enthusiasm either. The photographs were, she had to admit, striking in the way that unexpected things are striking. Not because she looked wrong in them, because she looked like herself, which the comment section apparently found significant and could not stop discussing. The gossip columns were gentler than she expected, and worse in different ways than she'd braced for. They called her unexpected. They called the pairing surprising. They called her full-figured, as though that were relevant information. Several of them ran the photograph from the ballroom, the one that had circulated before she knew. There was a photograph where she was still on the floor, and next to it, the photograph of her arriving at the concert in a dress that fit her and heels she had chosen herself. She did not read the comments sections. She had learned that about herself years ago. But she heard them secondhand, from a woman at a benefit luncheon who described her as a generous choice while looking directly at her body. From two men at a networking cocktail hour who stopped talking when Lucian stepped away and then started talking about her as though she were furniture. From a text message that appeared on her phone from an unknown number, just a photo, no words, one of the worst comments she'd seen on a gossip site, printed and sent to her directly. She deleted it and blocked the number and did not tell Lucian. Told Micah instead, during a visit, while he was eating the specific flavor of chips that the hospital vending machine only sometimes stocked, and that he treated as a personal victory every time it did. "They're being idiots about your body," he said. "Some people. What do you care what some idiots think?" "I don't," she said. And mostly she meant it. "I just wanted to tell someone." Micah looked at her with the particular clarity that chronically ill teenagers sometimes have, the kind that comes from spending a lot of time in rooms where there's nothing to do but think. "You're not doing this because you're scared, are you? Like scared it's the best you can do?" She looked at him. "No. Good. Because it's not, obviously." He looked back at his chips with the bluntness of a 15-year-old who had said the complicated thing and was now done with it. "How's the house?" "Big," she said. "Is he weird?" She thought about Lucian in his working office with his sleeves rolled up, and the tiredness around his eyes, and the way he had said, "You're more useful than I expected," without realizing it was a compliment. "He's complicated," she said. Micah nodded as though that was sufficient. "Don't let him think he can just decide it's about you." "I won't," she said. She was getting better at not letting people decide things about her. She was also getting better at watching Warren Kessler, who began attending more of the events where Imani was present and asking, with great warmth and zero urgency, small questions about logistics, about schedules, about Lucian's routines. She began giving him partial truths, things that were real enough to be credible and useless enough to cause no harm. She watched him file them away behind his uncle face and his practiced warmth, and she felt something cold and clear settle in her own chest, which she recognized as the specific emotion of being right about something you wished you were wrong about. She told Lucian what she was doing. He stood very still while she explained it. "You're feeding him," he said. "Controlled information." "Yes, without telling me first." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you now. That's not the same thing." "No, it's not." She didn't flinch. "But if I'd told you first, you might have told someone, and the circle of people who know changes the security of what I'm doing." Something moved in his jaw. He was angry. She could see it, the contained version, which with Lucian was the only version she'd seen, which somehow made it more convincing than the loud kind. "Don't do that again," he said. "I'll use my judgment." Imani Lucian. She kept her voice even, not combative. "Clear. You brought me in because I'm outside your organization. If you start treating me like I'm inside it, like you need to sign off on everything I do, then I become exactly as useful as everyone else you already have, which is apparently not useful enough." She paused. "Let me do what you actually hired me to do." The anger in him went through several phases. She watched them, the impulse toward authority, the recognition of her logic, the discomfort of both being simultaneously true. "Fine," he said finally, short and not warm and entirely genuine. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. I still don't like it." "I know." He left the room. She stood there for a moment in the space he'd vacated and breathed out slowly. That conversation was going to happen again. Several times, probably. Because she was right, and he knew she was right, and he didn't enjoy either of those facts. That was fine. She could handle uncomfortable. She was less prepared for what happened the following Tuesday. She had gone to see Micah in the morning, a routine visit, pre-surgery consultation, the kind of appointment where they reviewed things for the fourth time, because medical teams needed to be certain. She was in good spirits on the way back. The transplant was close. Everything was moving. The car that Lucian's team had assigned to her had dropped her at the estate gate. She was walking the short path to the front entrance when she heard the sound of another car slow on the road behind the gate, and she looked back. A dark sedan, tinted windows. It didn't stop, just slowed. Then continued. She stood there for 3 seconds, watching it go. She went inside. She went directly to Ellis, who was at his desk in the small office off the main hall. Car that just passed the gate, she said. Your camera's got it? Ellis was already looking. Plates are covered, he said, after a moment. But the make and model, he stopped. She leaned over to look at his screen. The make and model of the car matched one registered to a logistics company. A logistics company that appeared. In the documentation, Ellis now pulled up without being asked as a known subsidiary of Conrad Sloan's holding network. Straightened. Conrad knew her schedule today. He knew she'd been at the hospital. He knew when she was coming back. The only people who had her schedule today were Lucian's internal team. She felt the specific chill of a conclusion she did not want to reach arriving anyway, because truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. Someone inside Lucian's house had told Conrad where she would be. Picked up her phone to call Lucian, and she was already composing the words when she got the notification. Not from Lucian, not from Ellis. From an unknown number, a new one never seen before. One photograph. Micah, walking into the hospital entrance that morning, cap on his head, backpack on his shoulder, earbuds in, looking like a kid because he was a kid. And across the photograph, in white text, someone had written, "Even a king has something to lose." Her hand holding the phone went very still. Her breathing went very controlled. She stood in the hallway of Lucian Graves' estate and looked at the photograph of her 15-year-old brother who was 3 weeks from surgery, who had dialysis in 2 days, who complained about hospital food and talked about basketball, and she understood, with a Colton's absolute clarity, that the line had just been crossed from inconvenient to dangerous. She did not scream. She did not drop the phone. She stood in that hallway with the photograph on her screen and let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 10 seconds. The fear, the fury, specific sick feeling of knowing that someone had looked at Micah and calculated what he was worth as leverage. And then she put all of it somewhere behind her sternum where it couldn't interfere with what needed to happen next. She walked to Lucian's office. She didn't knock. He was on a call. He looked up when she entered, his expression shifting immediately from the particular blankness he wore for business to something sharper. He said 3 words into the phone, "I'll call back," and ended it without waiting for a response. She crossed the room and put her phone on his desk. Screen up, photograph visible. He looked at it. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "When did this arrive?" he said. 8 minutes ago. He picked up the phone, looked at it more closely. His face was doing the thing it did when the surface went completely still, and everything that was actually happening moved underneath, invisible to anyone who hadn't learned to watch for it. "Car outside the gate," she said. "Conrad's subsidiary. They followed me from the hospital." She kept her voice flat. "Precise. Someone in this house gave them my schedule today." Lucian set the phone down. He stood. He moved around the desk slowly, and she stepped back once to give him, not from fear, but from the instinct that this particular moment needed room. "I want maximum security on Micah tonight," she said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." "It's already happening," he said, reaching for his own phone. Ellis. He was already dialing. She listened to him give the orders. Efficiently. No wasted words. 2 men to the hospital. Discreet positioning. Coordinate with the floor nursing staff through the private medical contact. All of it in under 90 seconds. He lowered the phone. "He'll be covered before the shift change," he said. She nodded. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that, and then immediately aware of being proud of it, which meant she was using too much mental energy on the wrong thing. "I need to go to him," she said. "Not tonight, Lucian. If you go to him tonight, whoever sent that photograph knows it worked. They know the leverage holds." His voice was not gentle, but it wasn't cold either. It was the voice of someone delivering painful logic as quickly as possible. "The worst thing you can do right now is move in a way that confirms what they think they know about you." She knew he was right. She hated that she knew it. She pulled out the chair across from his desk and sat down because her legs had decided they were done performing steadiness, and she'd rather sit than wobble. The leak is internal, she said. Yes. Someone who had access to my schedule today. That's not a long list. No, he said, it's not. He sat back down. They looked at each other across the desk. 6 people knew your schedule today. Ellis, Gloria, my driver pool 2 men, my security coordinator. And Warren. She said nothing. She let that sit between them. Lucian's jaw shifted. Warren has known me for 10 years. I know. He was at my father's funeral. I know that too. She kept her voice quiet. Not soft, just quiet. Lucian. How much would Conrad Sloan need to offer someone who spent 19 years watching everything you built, knowing he'd never own any of it, to make them decide they'd rather be on the winning side? He was completely still. I'm not saying I can prove it yet, she said. I'm saying the pattern is there, the timing of the breaches. Questions he asks me. What he already knew about Micah before I told him. She paused. And today, Lucian stood up again. He moved to the window. He put his hands in his pockets and looked out at the lake, which was dark and restless, whitecaps visible even from this distance. She gave him the silence. She didn't try to fill it or rush it. He needed to arrive somewhere on his own, and she understood that about him by now. Don't tell Warren about the photograph, he said finally. I wasn't going to. Don't change how you interact with him. I know. He turned from the window. His face had resolved into something not peace, nothing like peace, but the particular focused calm of a decision made. I need the proof. Not suspicion, not pattern, actual proof. I'm working on it, she said. How long? She thought about what she had, what she still needed, the security log deviation, car outside the gate, the photograph and what it implied about timing, the small flash of recognition in Warren's eyes, when she'd mentioned Micah's basketball months ago, which she'd filed and kept and never stopped thinking about. I need access to Warren's communication records for the last 3 months, she said. Lucian looked at her. That's not, I know what it is, she said. I'm not asking you to do it yourself. I'm asking if you have someone who can. A long pause. It would have to be completely contained, he said. Obviously. And if it comes back clean, then I'm wrong, and I'll tell you I was wrong, and we go back to the original list. He looked at her for another moment. Then he went to his desk, wrote a name and a number on a piece of paper, and slid it across to her. Tell him I sent you, he said. Nothing else. She took the paper. She left the office and went to her suite and sat on the edge of the bed, and finally, with the door closed and no one watching, let herself shake for approximately 90 seconds. Then she stopped. She picked up her phone and called Micah's ward, directly not his personal phone, the nursing station, and spoke to the charge nurse, who confirmed that yes, his overnight was uneventful, yes. His vitals were stable, yes. He had complained extensively about dinner. She exhaled. Tell him his sister called, she said. Tell him I said the Lakers are still a disaster. I'll pass that along, the nurse said, with the tone of someone who had relayed stranger messages. Imani put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and thought about Warren Kessler's face, his warm Kessler's face, his warm, practiced uncle face, and felt the cold clarity that had been building in her chest for weeks sharpen into something that had an edge. She was going to find it, whatever he'd left behind him. Everyone who moved through 19 years of someone else's life left something. She just had to find it before he found her first. The man whose name was on Lucian's paper was called Rourke. He had no office that Imani could identify. They met in a coffee shop in Pilsen at 7 in the morning, and he was already there when she arrived, with a cup he'd barely touched and eyes that had already mapped the room twice. He was 50-something, compact, the kind of unremarkable that takes effort to achieve. She sat down across from him. He said, "You'd be specific," Rourke said. Warren Kessler. Communication records. 3 months back. Phone, encrypted messaging, anything that moved through the company servers he has access to. Rourke looked at her for a moment. Timeline? As fast as it can be done correctly. 72 hours, he said. 60, she said. He considered this briefly. Don't contact me. I'll contact you. He left before she finished her coffee. The 60 hours that followed had a particular texture to them, the stretched, hypersensitive quality of waiting, when the stakes are high enough that every normal thing feels slightly unreal. She went through the public motions. She attended a small private lunch with two of Lucian's legitimate business contacts, wives present, the kind of social event designed to reinforce a narrative. She sat beside Lucian at a table that cost $40 a chair for lunch and performed the version of herself that this world expected composed, present beside him in the way that read as chosen rather than transactional. She was getting better at the performance, without disappearing into it, which was its own specific skill. Warren was at the lunch. He sat across the table, 2 seats down, and he was everything he always was: warm, measured, asking her about Micah with what sounded like genuine care, refilling her water glass without being asked, telling a story about a sailing trip that made 3 people laugh. She watched him do all of it and felt the cold, clear thing in her chest stay absolutely still. "You seem tired," he said to her at one point, quietly, just to her. "Long week," she said. "It'll settle down," he said. "These early months are always the adjustment." He smiled, kind and collegial. "Lucian doesn't always make it easy, does he?" "He's fine," she said. "Of course." The smile held. "Of course he is." She smiled back and reached for her water glass and thought, "You sent that photograph, or you told someone who did, and I am going to prove it. And I am going to watch you understand that I proved it, and that is going to be enough." Rourke contacted her at 4 in the morning on the 58th hour. Not a call. A message with a file attached, from a number she wouldn't be able to reach again. She opened the file on her laptop in her suite with the desk lamp on and the rest of the room dark, and she started reading. It took her 2 hours. When she finished, she sat back in the chair and stared at the wall for a long time. It was worse than she'd suspected, not just in degree and kind. Warren hadn't merely been leaking financial information to Conrad Sloan. He had been doing it in a structured, deliberate, methodical way for over 8 months. Meeting notes, security rotation schedules, including the ones with Brandau's deviations which Warren had specifically arranged. Guest lists. The details of Lucian's legitimate company restructuring plans, which Conrad had used to make 3 preemptive moves in the commercial real estate market that had cost Lucian millions in lost contracts. And then there was the section she'd almost missed because it was buried in what looked like routine correspondence. Warren had been in contact with Celeste Whitmore, not before the gala, after it.
3 days after.
When the photographs of Imani on the ballroom floor had circulated, and Celeste's fury at being publicly discarded by Lucian in defense of a catering worker had curdled into something that needed an outlet. Warren had found her. He had offered her something: access, information, a vehicle for her resentment, and Celeste had given him the one thing she had: the details of Lucian and Imani's arrangement. She had suspected it from the beginning. She had spent 6 weeks confirming it through the networks of society connections that wealthy women maintain like infrastructure, invisible and essential. She'd handed it to Warren in a dinner meeting at a private club, and Warren had handed it to Conrad. Conrad knew the engagement was contractual. He had known for weeks. The entire architecture of what Imani had been doing, the careful feeding of partial truths to Warren, the controlled information, the work to protect Lucian's position had been conducted under the assumption that Conrad believed the arrangement was real, that Imani's presence was genuine, that Lucian's affection was a factor. If Conrad knew otherwise, every calculation shifted. Imani wasn't a vulnerability, she was a distraction. And Micah wasn't leverage against Lucian's love, he was leverage against Imani's usefulness. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. She went down the hall to Lucian's office. 4 in the morning. She knocked this time, once, hard. He opened it within a minute, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. He was still dressed. He looked at her face and stepped back to let her in. She put the laptop on his desk and stood back. "Read the section marked with the red tab," she said. Then read the last 20 pages. He sat, he read. She stood by the window and looked at the lake and listened to the silence of a man encountering something he'd trusted for 19 years, turning out to be hollow. She didn't watch him do it. She gave him that. When he spoke, his voice was entirely level and entirely unlike anything she'd heard from him before. Not the controlled calm of professional composure. The specific flatness of something that is controlling itself only through enormous, precise effort. Celeste, he said. She suspected the arrangement from the beginning. She gave Warren the confirmation he needed. And Warren has been operating as Conrad's primary source for 8 months, possibly longer. The records I have only go back 3. Silence. He knew about the contract, Lucian said. Not a question. Conrad has known for weeks, which means everything I've been doing the controlled information, the positioning he's been watching it, knowing it was performance. He let me think I was managing the situation. Another silence. This one longer. She turned from the window. Lucian was sitting at the desk with the laptop in front of him, and his hands flat on the surface on either side of it, very still, looking at the screen. The photograph of Micah, she said, wasn't about making me afraid, he said, completing the logic. It was about making me run, making me change my behavior in a way that disrupted whatever I was doing. She paused. Because I was getting close. They didn't know exactly what I had, but they knew I was looking in the right direction. Lucian closed the laptop. He stood. He moved around the desk and passed her to the window, and she turned to watch him. And for the first time since she'd known him, he looked like a man who was tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I have a board meeting in 11 days, he said. 3 companies. If Conrad moves in the next 2 weeks with what he knows, I lose the majority position in all 3. Everything legitimate I've spent 6 years building goes to him through a proxy acquisition. He paused. Warren structured the vulnerabilities himself. That's what the financial memos mean. He's been architecting the collapse from inside for 8 months. I know, and Brandau is the physical access point. Conrad needed someone in the security rotation to move things in and out of this building without being logged. He turned. I have 11 days, I know, she said again. Imani. He said her name the way he rarely did, like it was a complete sentence. What I'm about to tell you changes the contract. It changes what I originally asked of you. She waited. Whoever is inside my organization, beyond Warren and Brando, and there will be at least one more, there always is, knows your schedule, your access to this building, but your relationship to Micah, and the terms of our arrangement. He held her gaze. You are no longer incidental to this. You've been investigated, tracked, and threatened, which means you are now a direct target. I was always a target, she said. You were a peripheral one. Now you're central. He paused. I can have you and Micah move to a safe location tonight. Both of you. Secure, undisclosed, covered for the next 30 days. You'd be out of all of this. She looked at him. The contract would be honored completely, he said. Every term. I'm not offering you a way out of the deal. I'm offering you a way out of the danger. She understood what he was doing. She understood the difference between the offer and what it cost him to make it. Because removing her removed his best current source of uncompromised intelligence, and he knew that, and he was making the offer anyway. No, she said. I said no. She kept her voice even. Micah has a surgery in 3 weeks. He has dialysis in 2 days. You move him now. You disrupt the care team. You risk the pre-surgery protocol. I won't do that to him. She paused. And you need what I found. You need me to finish finding it. You are not, what? Not trained for this? She took a step toward him, not in confrontation, just in proximity, because she needed him to hear her clearly. Lucian, I found Warren in the security logs in 4 hours. I identified the car outside the gate before Ellis did. I've been feeding Warren controlled information for 3 weeks while he thought he was running me. She kept her voice quiet and direct. I am not a liability in this. You know I'm not. His jaw was tight. Something in him was fighting itself, visibly the impulse, to protect overriding the logic of her argument, and neither one winning cleanly. You have a tell, she said. He blinked. When you're trying to decide something that you've already actually decided, your left hand goes still. You stop moving it. She nodded toward his hand, which was in fact motionless against his thigh. You've already decided you can't send me away. You're just making yourself offer it. A long pause. Don't tell me what I'm doing, he said. Then stop doing it where I can see it. Something moved through his expression, not quite amusement, not quite frustration, something that lived in the precise territory between them, and then it was gone. What do you need? He said. She exhaled slowly. I need to get to Warren's physical records. He won't keep everything digital. There's something he's using as insurance. There always is, with someone who's been inside long enough to know how these things end. Something he can use against Conrad if Conrad ever decides to eliminate the middleman. She met his eyes. If I can find what he's holding, I can predict his next move. And how do you propose to access physical records belonging to my advisor without alerting him? He invited me to his apartment, she said. Lucian went very still. For dinner last week. He said it was something he does every year for the people closest to Lucian, his way of welcoming them. She kept her expression neutral. I told him I'd check my schedule. You're not going to his apartment alone. I'm not planning to go alone. She tilted her head slightly. I'm planning to go with a reason to be in his study while he's occupied with something else. Stared at her, Imani. His housekeeper is named Rosa. I know this because he mentioned her twice in conversations where he was trying to seem relatable. She comes on Thursdays. She paused. The dinner is on a Wednesday. Lucian put a hand over his mouth briefly, lowered it. You've been planning this. I've been noting things, she said. There's a difference. She held his gaze. Tell me I can do it. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she felt the weight of it not unpleasantly. The specific weight of being seen by someone who was capable of actually seeing. You wear the ring, he said. The emergency transmitter. The entire time. You check in every 20 minutes. Every 30. 25. Done, she said. If anything feels wrong, I'll get out. She paused. I know how to get out of a room, Lucian. He looked at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. Complex and unguarded in a way his face rarely was, something operating below the level of his control. I know you do, he said quietly. That's not what I'm worried about. She didn't ask him what he was worried about. She thought she understood it, and understanding it made her chest do something complicated and inconvenient. She turned and went to the door. Get some sleep, she said. You too, he said to her back. She paused at the door. Lucian, what Warren is doing. The 19 years... Don't, he said. Quiet and final, she left. 2 days later, Micah went to dialysis, and Imani went with him. And she sat in the waiting room and scrolled through the communication records again on her encrypted phone and made 3 additional connections she'd missed at 4 in the morning with adrenaline compromising her focus. Warren hadn't just been leaking to Conrad. He'd been preparing an exit strategy. There was a numbered account structure embedded in the financial correspondence, partial references, never complete, clearly coded, that pointed to money being moved incrementally out of the consulting fees Conrad was paying him into offshore holding positions. Warren was planning to survive this, to let Conrad take Lucian's empire apart, collect his payment, and disappear. He had been doing this for 8 months. He had sat across from Lucian at 19 years of dinners and meetings and funerals and board tables, and for 8 of those months, every warm word he'd spoken had been a lie with a price tag. She closed the app and looked at the dialysis ward door and thought about what loyalty actually cost, and who paid it, and who never paid anything at all. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ellis. Short. Brandau didn't come in this morning. No call. Phone is off. She sat up. Does Lucian know? She typed back. Telling him now. She stood. She walked to the window of the waiting room and looked out at the gray Chicago morning and understood what Brandau going dark meant. Conrad was accelerating. Something had spooked them. Maybe Rourke's access to the communications. Maybe something Warren had noticed in Imani's behavior. Maybe something else entirely that she hadn't seen coming. Whatever it was, the timeline had just compressed. She had planned to go to Warren's apartment in 4 days. She didn't have 4 days anymore. She called Lucian. He picked up on the first ring. I know, he said before she spoke. We need to move the dinner to tomorrow, she said. Pause. Ellis says Brandau's flight records show a booking to Mitz. I don't care where Brandau is going, she said. Brandau is a vessel. Warren is the source. If Conrad is pulling Brandau out, It means he's preparing to move on the board structure soon. We have less time than we thought. She kept her voice low. The waiting room had 2 other people in it, neither looking at her, but she was careful. Can you get Warren to confirm tomorrow? I'll manage it, Lucian said. I need something else. What? His study layout. Building schematic. Whatever you have. A pause that was longer than she expected. Then, I've been in that apartment 100 times. Then tell me everything. And so he did. Standing in his office 42 floors above the city, while she stood in a hospital waiting room and listened through her phone, Lucian Graves described Warren Kessler's private study from memory. The desk position, the filing cabinet on the east wall, the bookcase with the hidden panel that Warren thought no one knew about, the window that faced the alley and stayed unlocked, because Warren's wife had smoked for 30 years and the habit had survived her. And Imani listened and memorized every word, and felt the shape of what was coming take form around her. Inevitable and necessary, and frightening in the specific way things are frightening, that things are frightening when you have chosen to walk toward them rather than away. The dinner was confirmed for the following evening at 7. She had less than 30 hours to prepare for a conversation that, if it went wrong in any direction, would leave her alone in a room with a man who had already decided that the people she loved were acceptable collateral. She went back into the dialysis ward and sat beside Micah, who was reading and didn't look up immediately, and when he did, he looked at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing," she said. He looked at her for another second, with those clear, too perceptive eyes. "You're doing the thing where you look completely fine." "I'm fine." "That's the thing," he said, and went back to his book, but he reached over with his free hand and touched her arm briefly just once. Just for a second, and she looked at the side of his face and understood with absolute certainty that there was nothing she would not do, and nothing she would not become. To make sure he got to walk onto that basketball court with both kidneys working, and the rest of his life still ahead of him. She pressed her hand briefly over his where it rested on her arm. Then she straightened. She picked up the encrypted phone. She looked at the 30 hours she had left and started planning. The building Warren Kessler lived in was a 12-story pre-war limestone on the Gold Coast, the kind of address that said old money even if the money wasn't old, just carefully positioned. Imani had walked past it twice in the afternoon before the dinner, not slowly, not obviously. Just a woman on a sidewalk going somewhere, and she had noted the lobby desk, the camera positions, the elevator bank visible through the glass, the service entrance on the side street that the building's own schematic obtained through a property records RAL request. Ellis had filed under a shell name, showed led to the basement parking structure. She had also noted the florist 2 blocks east, which was where she stopped on the way there, because arriving with flowers was the kind of detail that read as warmth and gave you something to do with your hands. Lucian's car dropped her at the corner, not the door. She had insisted on that. 25 minutes, he said through her earpiece. Small, skin-toned, invisible at conversational distance. I know, she said quietly, and the ring is on my finger. She looked at the ring, the engagement ring his team had selected, platinum set with a dark stone, which she had privately thought was beautiful in an austere way, and publicly thought nothing about at all. The transmitter was in the band. She pressed her thumb against the stone once, confirming the activation. Tiny pulse against her skin confirmed it was live. I'm going in, she crossed the street. She smiled at the lobby desk attendant, a young man who checked her name against a list and called up without making eye contact. The professional neutrality of someone who had worked a building like this, long enough to stop being curious about who visited whom. She took the elevator to the 9th floor. Warren opened the door himself. He was in a dark sweater, no jacket, the studied informality of a man who wanted her to feel that this was relaxed and personal. His apartment smelled of something cooking real. Cooking, not catered, and there was music playing low, something instrumental and unobtrusive. Imani. He smiled the uncle smile, wide and warm and completely practiced. I'm so glad you could make it. Thank you for having me, she said. She held out the flowers. I didn't know what you liked, so I went with something that wouldn't make assumptions. He laughed and took them and said something about his late wife having loved tulips, and she filed that away without showing she'd filed it. He brought her through a wide entrance hall. She noted the coat closet, the alarm panel that was not armed, the second door at the end of the hall that would be the study, and into a living room that was comfortable in the way of someone who spent real time in it. Books, not decorative. A reading chair with a worn arm. Photographs that were genuinely personal rather than performed. He was good. He was very, very good. There were two other guests, a man named Hartley, who ran one of Lucian's legitimate property funds, and his wife, a soft-spoken woman named Grace, who asked Imani within 3 minutes whether she'd always lived in Chicago and then actually listened to the answer. Imani relaxed into Grace's genuine interest like it was a temperature change and kept the rest of herself alert. Dinner was served at the table in the dining room. Warren had cooked a roast himself. She verified this because she'd asked specifically, and his hands, when he'd carved it, had this specific confidence of someone who had done this 100 times. It was good. She ate and she talked, and she let Warren refill her wine glass twice, drinking less than it appeared, and she watched him move through the evening with the ease of a man who considered himself entirely safe in this space. 25 minutes into dinner, she set down her fork. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" she said to the table. "I need to make a quick call Micah's pre-surgery check-in." Immediate, unanimous understanding. Grace touched her arm briefly. Warren said, "Of course, take all the time you need," and pointed her toward the hallway. She went to the hallway. She did not take out her phone. She walked past the powder room, past the coat closet, to the second door at the end of the hall, which opened, as Lucian had told her it would, on a handle that required a firm push at the top because the frame had warped slightly over the years. She pushed. It opened. The study was dark. She didn't turn on the overhead light. There was enough ambient light from the city through the window. Warren's late wife smoking, unlocked, exactly as Lucian had said that she could move without illuminating herself. The desk first. She moved to it quickly, pulled on the thin latex gloves she'd transferred to her dress pocket before leaving the estate, and opened the center drawer. Paper, pens, a checkbook, nothing useful. She moved to the side drawers files, neatly labeled, nothing that read as anything other than normal household management. The filing cabinet on the east wall. She crossed to it. 2 drawers, both locked. She had a key, not a physical key, but the knowledge that Lucian had told her the cabinet was a standard residential lock, and Ellis had told her the model, and the thin tension wrench and pick she'd practiced with for 3 hours the previous evening were also 6 in her dress pocket. Her hands were steady. She told them to be, and they were. 40 seconds. The first drawer opened. She went through it fast. Her fingers moved over files, tabbed, dated, organized with the neatness of a man who had been meticulous his entire professional life. Business records, old correspondence, property documents. She was near the back of the drawer when she found the manila folder with no label. She opened it. Her eyes moved over the first page in the thin city light, and her brain processed it in the specific rapid way of adrenaline-sharpened attention. Financial records. Transfers. Not the coded partial references she'd found in the digital communications. Complete records, printed, annotated in Warren's own hand. Count numbers. Dates. Amounts that totaled, when she ran them in her head, to something approaching $2 million moved in 8 months. And behind the financial records, something she had not expected. Contract. Not between Warren and Conrad. Between Warren and a third party, a name she didn't recognize at the top, a corporate entity with an address in Delaware that meant nothing on its face. But the terms were explicit. Warren would deliver the mechanism for a hostile acquisition of 3 specific companies, the exact 3 Lucian had identified, and, in exchange, Warren would receive a 15% equity stake in the consolidated entity. He wasn't working for Conrad. Conrad was working for someone else. And Warren was the bridge. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Not walking toward the kitchen, walking toward the study. She closed the filing cabinet. The click of the lock engaging was quieter than her heartbeat. She was across the room in 4 steps and beside the window, and she pressed herself to the wall beside the frame, out of the direct sightline of the door, in the 2 seconds before it opened. Warren stood in the doorway. He didn't turn the light on. He stood there in the dark, and she could not see his face, and she thought, he's listening. He doesn't know I'm here, but he's checking. She did not breathe. The ring was on her finger. She did not press it, not yet. The signal would be silent on her end, but she didn't know what it triggered on Lucian's, and she couldn't afford sound. Warren stood in the doorway for 8 seconds. She counted. Then he withdrew. He pulled the door partially closed. She exhaled through her nose, measured and silent. She gave it 90 seconds. Then she moved back to the desk, photographed the pages from the unlabeled folder on her phone, with the flash disabled, replaced everything in exact order, relocked the cabinet, removed her gloves, and went back into the hallway. She could hear Warren in the kitchen, water running. She went to the powder room, closed the door, stood inside for 45 seconds, flushed without having needed to, and came out. She walked back into the dining room. "Everything all right?" Grace asked. "All good." She sat down. "He's complaining about the food again, which I'm choosing to read as a positive sign." Laughter. Warren came back from the kitchen with dessert plates, and he looked at her just once, briefly, with those warm, practiced eyes, and she looked back and let her own face be open and easy and entirely present. He had heard her leave the table. She was almost certain he had checked the study. She was completely certain he had not found anything different from how he'd left it. She made it through dessert and 40 minutes more of conversations that she later could not have recounted if asked, and she said good night at 9:47, and Warren walked her to the door, and as he held it open, he said, "I hope you know how much it means to Lucian, having someone like you." She looked at him. "Someone steady," he said, "in a life that hasn't always had it. He's lucky to have people who've been there for a long time," she said. "People he trusts." Warren smiled. "That's what I'm here for," he said. She smiled back. She walked to the elevator. She kept her face neutral until the lobby doors closed behind her. And then she was on the sidewalk, and she walked half a block north and stopped in a doorway and pressed the stone of the ring. 3 times the signal she and Lucian had agreed meant I have something, and I'm out, and I'm safe, and then she let herself feel, for exactly the duration of 2 slow breaths, the full adrenaline shock of what she'd just done. Then she started walking toward the car. Lucian was already on the phone when she got in. He looked at her face, and then looked at the phone and said, "I'll call you back," and put it in his pocket. "There's a third party," she said. "Conrad isn't the principal. He's a vehicle. Someone else is running this acquisition." She handed him her phone with the photographs open. He looked at the first page, then the second. Then he went through all of them, and his face was doing the still thing again. But this time there was something underneath it she hadn't seen before, not quite fear, but adjacent to it. The specific expression of a man who has just discovered the threat is significantly larger than he'd mapped. "The Delaware entity," he said. "It's a shell, but the contract terms are specific enough that your attorneys can trace the beneficial owner." She paused. This is what Warren was holding as insurance. Proof that the entire operation exists, with his own role documented. If Conrad ever moved against him, Warren could use this to expose the whole structure. And now we have it. And now we have it. She held his gaze. "Lucian, whoever is behind this shell, they want those 3 companies badly enough to fund an 8-month internal operation with a multi-million-dollar payment structure. This isn't opportunistic. This is deliberate. And it's been building for longer than we know." He was quiet. "The board meeting," she said. 11 days. 9 now, he said. She nodded. "We move on Warren before then." "We have to. If we move on Warren, Conrad knows within hours." "Yes. So we have to move on Conrad at the same time," she watched him think. "Your attorneys and the corporate investigators, if they have this documentation, how fast can they act? The filing alone would freeze the acquisition attempt. 48 hours if we push. Then we need 2 things simultaneously. Warren's confession on record and the documentation in front of the investigators at the same moment. So Conrad can't be warned and pull the trigger early." She paused. "Which means we need Warren to talk." Lucian was very still. "Warren won't confess to anything voluntarily." "Not voluntarily," she agreed. But if he believes he's already exposed, if he believes Conrad is about to cut him loose to save himself, he might decide that getting ahead of it is better than being left behind it. She met his eyes. We give him the choice before he realizes he still has one. A long pause. You want to confront him, Lucian said. I want you to confront him, with me in the room. She paused. He's underestimated me the entire time. Let him keep doing it until it's too late to matter. Lucian looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than most of the conversation. You know what happens if this goes wrong, he says it. Not a threat. A clarity. Yes, she said. I know exactly what happens. She held his gaze. Set the meeting for tomorrow morning, his office. Tell him it's about the board restructuring. Something urgent, but not alarming. He nodded slowly. And Lucian. She waited until she had his full attention. Tonight was the last time I go anywhere without telling you first. Something moved in his expression relief, and something more complicated behind it. Thank you, he said quietly. Car moved through the city, and outside, Chicago was doing what it always did. At this hour, indifferent and enormous, and lit up against the dark, and Imani looked at her reflection in the window and recognized the woman looking back at her. Not the catering worker, not the contract fiancé. Someone who had decided, somewhere between a ballroom floor and a darkened study, that she was going to see this through, to whatever end it had, and she was going to do it on her own terms. The meeting was set for 10 the next morning. Warren arrived 2 minutes early, which told her he was careful. He had a leather folder and his uncle face and coffee he'd brought himself in a paper cup, and he settled into the chair across from Lucian's desk, with the ease of a man who had occupied this room 1,000 times. And considered it, in some essential way, his own. Imani was sitting to the side of the desk, not behind it. Warren registered her presence with a brief nod and a warm smile, and then directed his attention to Lucian. You said it was urgent, Warren said. It is, Lucian said. He put Imani's phone photographs on the desk, printed. He slid them across. Warren looked at the first page. The coffee cup in his hand was very still. He looked at the second page. Something happened to his face, that Imani watched carefully, the sequence of calculations moving behind his eyes too fast for most people to see. But she had been watching Warren Kessler's face for 3 months. She knew his rhythms. She watched him reach, in under 4 seconds, the conclusion that denial was not viable. Where did you get these? He said. His voice was completely level. She gave him that. Does it matter? Lucian said. Warren set the pages down. He set the coffee cup down. He sat back in the chair and looked at the man he had worked beside for 19 years with an expression that was, finally, completely unperformed. He looked tired, genuinely deeply tired. How long? Lucian's voice was quiet in the way that his quiet was always quieter than other people's loud. Warren said nothing. How long, Warren? A pause. 8 months. The operational phase. Another pause. The decision was longer. The air in the room changed. Imani sat very still. The decision, Lucian repeated. To get out. Warren's voice was flat now. Not hostile. Resigned in the specific way of someone who has arrived. Somewhere they've been traveling toward for years. You were never going to bring me in, Lucian. Not at the level I'd earned. 19 years, and I was always the advisor. Always the room next door. His jaw shifted. Conrad offered me equity. An actual stake in something. Not a salary, not a consulting fee, a stake. So you sold everything I built. I helped someone else build something. Warren looked at him steadily. That's not the same thing. You put a photograph of a 15-year-old boy in surgery on someone's phone, Lucian said. His voice had dropped further. It was very, very quiet now. My security, my company records, my people, and a child. Warren's eyes moved briefly to Imani. Back to Lucian. That wasn't my directive, but you provided the schedule, Imani said. Warren looked at her. The uncle face was completely gone. What was underneath it was more interesting, not villainous, not cold. Just a man who had made a calculation and was now sitting in the outcome. You're smarter than he told me you'd be, Warren said to her. He said you were a convenience, a prop, a pause. He was wrong. Conrad, she said. Conrad. Warren looked back at Lucian. He said she'd be gone in 6 weeks. That you'd get bored, or she'd figure out what she'd walked into and leave. Something moved in his face. I had some doubts about that assessment. The Delaware entity, Lucian said. Who is the beneficial owner? Warren was quiet. Warren. Lucian leaned forward slightly. Conrad is going to know within 2 hours that this meeting happened. When he does, he will assume you've made a decision. Whatever value you have to him as an asset ends at that moment. He paused. Tell me the name. A long silence. His name is Raymond Voss, Warren said. He's based in Geneva. He's been building a North American logistics and real estate portfolio for 6 years through shell acquisitions. Conrad is his Chicago vehicle. Your 3 companies complete a corridor he's been assembling from Indianapolis to Milwaukee. Lucian wrote the name. Imani had her phone recording she'd started it when Warren sat down, in her lap, angled up, audio only. He doesn't know you exist, Warren said to Lucian. Not personally. To him, you're just the last asset in the corridor that needs to be dislodged. How is he going to do it? The board vote. Conrad holds enough proxies through the compromise members to force a restructure. With your internal security undermined and the financial records making your governance look and stuff, the institutional investors pull out. The valuation drops. Voss comes in through a subsidiary and acquires at distressed pricing. Warren looked at his hands for a moment. It's clean, it's legal, and you'd never trace it back to him. When? Imani asked. Warren looked at her again. The vote was moved up. It's not in 9 days, he paused. It's in 4. The silence that landed was physical. Imani felt it in her sternum. 4 days, not 9. Someone had moved it and not told Lucian. She looked at Lucian, whose face was completely still in the way that she now knew was not composure, but the controlled suppression of something enormous. Which board member? He said. Aldridge, Warren said. Conrad has been managing him for 6 months. He filed the motion to advance the vote date 3 days ago. Your notification should have come yesterday. Warren paused. Did it come? Lucian looked at Ellis, who had been standing near the door. Ellis pulled out his phone. His face did something that answered the question before he spoke. It was flagged as administrative correspondence, Ellis said. It went to the secondary inbox. He stopped. Brando had access to the email routing protocols, Imani said quietly. The room held that for a moment. 4 days. One compromised board member who'd filed a motion. A notification that had been buried. An acquisition built over 6 years by a man in Geneva who didn't know Lucian's name. I want protection, Warren said. If I give you everything I have on Voss and Conrad, the complete documentation, the count structures, the communications I want, protection from prosecution, and from Conrad. Lucian looked at him. I want your word, Warren said. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Something crossed his face that Imani couldn't fully read the specific expression of a man encountering the limits of what he can give. My word means something different from what it did yesterday, Lucian said. You know that. I know, Warren said. I'm asking anyway. Another silence. Imani watched Lucian and understood that he was weighing something that existed in the space where justice and pragmatism intersect, which is never a comfortable space and never offers clean answers. I'll keep you alive, Lucian said. What happens after that is between you and the people's laws you broke. I won't interfere in either direction. He held Warren's gaze. That's what I can give. Warren looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. He spent the next 2 hours producing everything. He made calls while Lucian's attorney listened and recorded. He provided account numbers and contact names and the specific encrypted channel Conrad used to communicate with Voss's representatives. He provided the dates and contents of meetings Imani had never known existed. He provided the name of the second internal asset, not Brando, who was already running, but a junior analyst in Lucian's legitimate corporate office who had been feeding Voss's team the governance documentation that made the hostile acquisition legally viable. He provided all of it with the same flatness he'd had since the photographs landed on the desk. Not remorse exactly, but the specific emotional temperature of a man who has stopped lying and discovered that honesty, even unwanted honesty, has its own strange relief. By noon, Lucian's attorneys had filed 4 separate emergency actions with a federal commerce court. By 1 in the afternoon, the analyst handling Voss's shell entity had received a preservation notice that froze the relevant accounts. 3. Conrad Sloane's office had been contacted by federal investigators. Imani sat in Lucian's actual office, not the workroom, the formal one, and watched Ellis move in and out with updates, and thought about 4 days and how close it had been. How the buried email notification had nearly made 4 days into 0. How one person with access to an email routing protocol had come within a single notification of making everything impossible. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick it up. She picked it up. Ms. Brooks. The voice was male, accented in a way she couldn't immediately place measured and unhurried. My name is not important. What's important is that you understand the following. A pause. What happened this morning with Mr. Kessler was very foolish. The filing with the Commerce Court was also very foolish. These things have consequences that your Mr. Graves may not be prepared for. She said nothing. The board vote will proceed as scheduled, the voice continued. In 4 days, the legal actions will be challenged and dismissed within 48 hours by attorneys significantly better resourced than Mr. Graves' current team. And you, a pause, will be somewhere that makes you unavailable to cause further disruption. She kept her breathing even. What I would like, the voice said, is for you to pass this message to Mr. Graves. He has until 6 o'clock this evening to contact us and discuss a different kind of arrangement. One that allows him to keep certain personal assets in exchange for stepping back from the board position. A pause. After 6 o'clock, the nature of the conversation changes. As does your brother's care arrangement. The line went dead. She stood. She walked out of the formal office and into the workroom where Lucian was on the phone with his attorney, and she stood in the doorway and he looked at her face and said into the phone, "I'll call you back." She told him what the call had said, all of it, word for word, the way she'd been trained, by no one, through the specific practice of a life that had always required her to hold things exactly. Lucian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. "Voss," he said. "Yes, he's moving directly." He stood. "The attorneys are wrong about the 48-hour challenge. Voss has done this before. The challenge won't hold if we supplement the filing with the account documentation Warren provided. But we need to do it now today, before 6. And after 6? His jaw was tight. After 6, it becomes a different kind of problem. "Micah," she said, "I know." He picked up his phone. Then he stopped. He looked at her, and it was the unguarded look, the one she saw only in the workroom and never in public, the one that had no performance in it. "Imani, I need you to make a choice right now, and I need you to make it for yourself. Not for the contract." She looked at him. "If you take Micah and leave the city tonight, I can have you somewhere safe by morning. Both of you. The board situation I can fight. The legal filings are in motion. Warren's documentation changes the trajectory, even if it doesn't guarantee the outcome." He held her gaze. "But Voss just told you they'll use Micah again. And the next time it won't be a photograph." She was quiet. "Choose," he said. She looked at his face. At the tiredness and the realness of it. At the man who had crossed a ballroom for a stranger and had not, in any moment she could identify, treated her as less than exactly what she was. She thought about Micah. She thought about the basketball court. She thought about what it meant to run not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told to make themselves smaller, the Volspor, so the threat would pass them by. "I'm not leaving," she said. Something in him settled. Not relieved, settled, like a decision confirmed. "Then we have until 6 o'clock, he said, "and we need to use every minute of it." His phone was already at his ear. Hers was in her hand. The afternoon light was moving across the lake outside, and the city was continuing, indifferent, the way cities always do when private wars are being fought inside their buildings. She had been in this situation before. Not this specific situation. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this specific situation, but the essential version of it. The corner, the wall at her back, the choice between the ground and what came after you hit it. She had gotten up off a ballroom floor. She would get up from this too. What neither she nor Lucian knew yet as they worked through the afternoon against a 6 o'clock deadline with Warren's documentation and a federal filing, and the names of the people arrayed against them, was that Voss was not the kind of man who waited for a deadline to pass before acting on what he'd already planned. At 4:47, Lucian's phone lit up with a call from Ellis. And Ellis's voice, when Lucian answered, had the specific quality of someone delivering news they have confirmed twice because they needed to be certain before they said it out loud. And Lucian's face went through something that Imani had never seen on it before, a fracture, clean and deep in the controlled surface. And he lowered the phone and looked at her and said, "They have you." The words landed like something physical. Imani stood very still. The afternoon light was still moving across the lake. The city was still continuing. Her brain processed the two words and then immediately began the work of not falling apart, which was the only useful response available. "Where?" she said. Not a question, a demand. Lucian was already moving. Ellis. Location. Into the phone, clipped and immediate. He listened. His face went through the fracture again and then closed over it. "How many?" She crossed to him. She put her hand on his arm, not for comfort, for information. She needed to see his face when Ellis answered. What she saw told her it was bad. "Tell me," she said when he lowered the phone. They took the car. His voice was very controlled. "The driver who was taking you to the pre-surgery appointment tomorrow, they accessed his routing through the same protocol, Brandau compromised. They knew the route before he did." He looked at her, and she could see, underneath all of it, the specific thing she'd never seen on his fist before, fear that had someone's name on it. Her name. They intercepted the vehicle 2 hours ago. The driver was left at the scene. "He's unharmed." "Micah," she said. "Micah is still at the hospital. He's safe." They weren't going after Micah. He held her gaze. "They were going after you." The logic of it assembled in her head in under 3 seconds. She was the one who had found Warren. She was the one who had photographed the documents. She was the one who had given Lucian's attorneys the foundation for the federal filing. Removing Micah had been the threat. Removing her was the solution. Voss wasn't waiting until 6 o'clock. He never had been. The phone call had been a diversion, 40 minutes of Lucian's attention directed toward attorneys and filings, while someone else moved on the actual target. "Car I was supposed to be in," she said. "Yes." She stood very still for one complete second, then something in her chest that had been cold and clear and steady for 3 months sharpened into something different, not colder, but harder. The specific quality of a decision made in the body before the mind has fully caught up. "They don't have me," she said. "No. But they... Lucian." She waited until he looked at her. "They planned this for a vehicle I wasn't in, which means they're currently holding a car with no one in it that matters, and they don't know that yet." She kept her voice level. "How long before they figure that out?" He understood immediately. She watched him understand. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe less. "Then we have 20 minutes in which they believe they have leverage, and we know they don't." She held his gaze. "Where would they take a car they thought I was in?" He was already reaching for his phone. "Ellis, the freight terminal on the river." "Check it." She knew why he said freight terminal. She didn't ask. She watched him make 2 more calls in rapid succession, his voice dropping into a register she'd only heard from him once the night with Warren's photographs, when he'd ordered Micah's protection. Precise, unhurried, the specific calm of someone who is most themselves when the situation is worst. Ellis called back in 4 minutes. The freight terminal. An abandoned commercial structure on the Chicago River's South Branch, a property that had changed shell company hands 3 times in the last 2 years. Through entities that Lucian's attorney was now, Imani had no doubt, staring at with very wide eyes. She looked at the ring on her finger. "The transmitter," she said. "If they'd had me, if I were actually in that terminal, they'd have found it, eventually." "Yes, but not immediately." "No," she looked at him. "I want to go." "Absolutely not, Lucian."
You just told me they took a car they thought you were in.
"Going to the location where they're waiting for you is tactically sound if it's coordinated," she said. "They're expecting a frightened woman in a car. They're not expecting her to arrive differently, with time to prepare, before they realize their leverage is empty." She kept her voice quiet. And they have things on those premises, communications equipment, documentation of the operations, physical logistics that we need before they destroy it. He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. I hate this, he said. I know. It's the right call and I hate it. I know that too. He made the call. His people were already moving toward the terminal. He redirected them, gave the new timeline, specified the approach pattern, spoke with his attorney simultaneously through the other line about the federal filing supplement, which needed to be submitted before the 6 o'clock window, regardless of what happened at the terminal, because the legal battle and the physical one were running in parallel, and neither could wait for the other. She stood beside him and listened to all of it, and felt the specific sensation of the world, having narrowed to exactly this room, this man, this plan, and the 20 minutes that were now 18. They went in his car, not the estate vehicle, a different one. Plates that meant nothing traceable. A man named Cross drove, who said nothing and needed no instructions, which told her everything about what Cross had been hired to do in situations that were not supposed to exist anymore. She sat in the back beside Lucian, and the city moved past outside, and she thought about Micah sitting in his hospital room complaining about food, and she thought about the ballroom floor, and she thought about the paralegal office on Wabash, and Denise Park reading a contract and asking whether she trusted the man who'd written it. She had not answered that question then. She knew the answer now. The ring, Lucian said. It's on, if anything. You'll know immediately. He looked at her. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing the thing she had learned to read the underneath of him, the real version, operating just below the controlled surface. He looked like a man who had built his entire adult life around the principle of having nothing that could be used against him, and who was sitting in a car next to the definitive evidence that the principle had failed. She reached over and put her hand over his, not for his benefit, for hers, because she was under all the clarity and the steadiness and the decisions made in the body before the mind caught up. A 28-year-old woman who had been carrying everything alone for 3 years, and who was tired genuinely, bone-deep tired, and who needed, for approximately 30 seconds, to not carry it alone. He turned his hand over and held hers. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. 30 seconds. Then she took her hand back and looked at the river through the window as the car turned south, and she felt the fear settle into something she could work with, and she was ready. The freight terminal was a long, low structure, industrial and lightless from the outside, set back from the river access road, behind a chain-link fence that had been cut clean recently enough that the metal still showed bright at the edges. Lucian's people had arrived in 3 vehicles that were parked in the darkness half a block north. Cross pulled in behind them and stopped. Lucian's team lead, a woman named Sato, compact and completely focused, met them at the car. 4 individuals inside, she said, 2 on the east door. 1 mobile, interior. 1 stationary, north end, that's probably command. She looked at Imani. They're waiting. They have the vehicle inside, they haven't opened it yet. They think she's in it, Lucian said. That's the read. Sato looked at Imani again. You understand what you're doing? I walk in through the west access, the river-facing door, which is unlocked, because they used it for the vehicle entry and haven't reset the mechanism. I am, as far as they know, exactly who they expected to intercept. I need 8 minutes before anyone comes in. 6, Sato said. After 6, I'm not responsible for sequencing. 7, Imani said. Sato looked at Lucian. He nodded once. 7, Sato said. Ring goes hot the moment you're inside. Imani pressed the stone. Pulse against her skin confirmed transmission. She walked toward the west door. The inside of the terminal was enormous and dark and smelled of river damp and old machinery, the specific cold of a space that has not been heated in months. Overhead, the structural beams were black against the faint ambient light from the river-facing windows, tall, industrial. Original to a building that had been many things and was currently nothing except a place where someone had decided to conduct business that couldn't happen anywhere visible. She could hear from the north end voices, indistinct at this distance. 2 registers, one higher than the other. She moved along the west wall. Her shoes, she had changed them in the car, flat soles. Nothing that clicked, made no sound on the concrete. She kept to the deepest shadow and moved toward the voices, the way she had learned to move through rooms full of people who weren't looking for her, present but unregistered, quiet but not hiding. The vehicle, the car that should have had her in it, was parked near the center of the space. The man she identified as Interior Mobile was standing beside it, looking at his phone. He hadn't opened the doors yet. She could see, in his posture, the beginning of the recalibration that comes before an unwelcome realization, the slight tension, the second look at the phone. He was about to figure it out. She stepped out of the shadow. Looking for me, he spun. She was already moving not toward him, away, diagonal, toward the north end where the voices had been coming from, because the mobile guard was not the objective. The objective was command, and command was at the north end, and she needed to be in front of him before Sato's people came through the doors, because what she needed from this could not be taken by force. It could only be given. The man at the north end was standing beside a folding table with a laptop and 2 phones and a water bottle, and the specific stillness of someone who operates these situations from a distance and is not accustomed to the situation arriving in front of him. She had never seen his face before, but she recognized the type, the administrator of violence, the man who makes calls and waits for results and considers himself several layers removed from the thing he's actually doing. He was perhaps 55, well-dressed even here, silver at his temples, the face of a European business executive who gave keynotes at conferences about strategic growth. He was also, she understood immediately, not Warren, not Conrad, not anyone she had expected. "You're not Voss," she said. His eyes moved over her with rapid assessment. He had not expected her to be standing in front of him, which meant he was operating on the assumption that she was still in the car, which meant Sato's 7 minutes hadn't started yet from his perspective. "Mr. Voss does not attend field operations," the man said. His accent was the same as the phone call, precise European, designed for boardrooms. "What do you attend?" she said. Currently, a situation that has become more complicated than it needed to be." He looked at her with something that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, the specific regard of someone who is reassessing a variable. "You are more resourceful than our information suggested." "Your information came from Warren Kessler," she said. "Who thought I was a prop?" She kept her hands visible and her voice even. He was wrong, apparently. The man took a step to his right. She moved to mirror him. He stopped. "You understand that the legal filing this afternoon changes nothing. Mr. Voss's legal team has resources that—" "I'm not here to talk about the filing," she said. He paused. "I'm here because you're holding communications equipment and documentation that will tell me, and the federal investigators who are going to be at your door within the next 48 hours, regardless of whatever your attorneys do, exactly how this operation was structured from Geneva to Chicago." She kept her eyes on his. "And I'm here because you have approximately 4 minutes before the people who came with me come through those doors. And after that, this conversation happens in a room with lawyers and federal oversight, and nothing stays contained." He was very still. "But right now," she said, "it's just us. And you can make a decision about what that means." He studied her. The laptop on the table behind him had a screensaver running. The screensaver can had gone idle, which meant he had not been actively working when she arrived, which meant he had been waiting. He was a man accustomed to waiting. She could use that. "What decision?" he said. "The same one Warren made this morning," she said. "You're a logistics man. You organize things. You're not the one who built this, and you're not the one who will lose the most when it comes apart. Voss is in Geneva. You are in a freight terminal in Chicago." She paused. "Those are not equivalent positions." Something moved behind his eyes. "The USB on that table," she said. "I want what's on it." He looked at the table, back at her. "You can see a USB drive from—" "It's the only thing on that table that isn't disposable," she said. "The phones are burners. The laptop is wiped on a schedule. The water bottle is a water bottle. But someone who attends field operations for a man like Voss carries insurance." She held his gaze. "You've been watching Warren run this from the inside, and you know better than anyone that the people at the top leave the people in the middle holding the exposure. That USB is your insurance." He stood very still. 30 seconds, she said quietly. After that, it becomes someone else's decision. The man's jaw shifted. He looked at her with the expression of someone making a calculation they had hoped they wouldn't need to make, and she watched him arrive at the answer, and he picked up the USB from the table and held it out. She took it. She pressed the ringstone 3 times. Sato came through the east door 11 later. Cross came through the west. 3 additional people entered from the river access, and the terminal filled with the organized, controlled motion of people who know exactly what they're doing. And the man with the European accent put his hands up without being asked and looked at Imani with the expression of someone who has just watched a variable they underestimated redraw the entire equation. "Smart woman," he said. "I've been told," she said, and stepped back to let Sato's people do what they came to do. Lucian was at the west door. She hadn't known he'd come inside. He was supposed to stay with Cross. She saw from his face that he had made approximately 30 seconds after she'd walked in, before deciding he was not staying with Cross. She walked to him. He looked at her face, at her hands, at the USB she was holding. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." He exhaled, just once, just audibly. It was the most unguarded sound she had ever heard him make. She held up the USB, Voss's logistics man. He decided the middle wasn't a comfortable place to be. Lucian looked at it. "What's on it?" "I don't know yet. But I know what it is." She met his eyes. "It's the proof that runs all the way to Geneva." He looked at her for a long moment, in the cold dark of the terminal, with the sound of Sato's people working around them, and the river moving outside, and the city existing in its enormous, indifferent way beyond the walls. "I told Cross to stay with you," he said. "I know. I didn't stay with Cross. I know that too." He looked at her with the unguarded expression, the real one, and said nothing else, and she thought that said enough. The next 72 hours were not cinematic. They were coffee going cold, and attorneys talking for hours, and federal investigators who asked questions with the particular cadence of people who had learned to find inconsistency in everything. They were Lucian's phone ringing at all hours, and Ellis managing a situation that kept expanding its own edges, and Imani sitting at the small desk in her suite at 1 a.m. reading the contents of the USB with a translator she'd pulled from. A language app for the 3 documents that were in German, and feeling with each page the architecture of what Voss had built become visible. The USB contained 18 months of operational records. Communications between Voss's office and Conrad's. Financial routing through 6 different shell structures. The original acquisition blueprint that identified Lucian's 3 companies by name and assessed them, clinically, as components to be absorbed. It also contained a personnel file. Warren's. Voss's team had been managing Warren the same way. Warren had been managing Brandau compartmentalized, compensated, and ultimately disposable. The file included a termination protocol. Had the acquisition succeeded, Warren would not have received his equity stake. He would have received a buyout at a fraction of the promised amount, and a non-disclosure agreement he would have been in no position to fight. Warren had been deceived by the people he'd betrayed Lucian to serve. She sat with that for a long time, not with sympathy exactly, but with the specific weight of understanding how easy it is to commit to a wrong direction when you've convinced yourself it's the only direction available. She sent the personnel file to Lucian's attorney with a note that said, "Warren should know this." She didn't know what Lucian would do with that recommendation. She sent it anyway. The federal filing held. Voss's attorneys were, in fact, very good, but the documentation from Warren combined with the USB gave Lucian's team a foundation that could not be dismantled quickly, and quickly was what Voss needed. The board vote was stayed by court order 43 hours after Sato's people had walked into the freight terminal. Aldridge, the compromised board member, resigned before the stay was issued, which told Imani he'd had his own attorney's advice and had taken it. Conrad Sloan did not take his attorney's advice. He gave a statement to a financial press outlet that described the entire situation as a misunderstanding and a politically motivated legal action, which was so obviously false that even the outlet that published it included 3 paragraphs of rebuttal. By the end of the week, Two of Conrad's own business partners had publicly distanced themselves. Voss in Geneva said nothing publicly. He would, Lucian's attorney predicted, say nothing publicly for a very long time while the legal process worked and his resources quietly eroded. Micah's surgery was on a Thursday 3 weeks later. Imani sat in the waiting room for 6 hours and 40 minutes. She had brought a book she did not read. She had brought coffee she did not drink. She sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent light, and she was, for 6 hours and 40 minutes, simply a 28-year-old woman waiting to find out if her brother was going to be all right. Lucian sat beside her for 4 of those hours. He had a meeting he rescheduled without telling her. She found afterward from Ellis. She found out afterward, who mentioned it in passing with the specific neutrality of someone who did not consider it worth noting, and therefore considered it entirely notable. Lucian didn't mention it. She didn't thank him for it. They sat in plastic chairs under fluorescent light, and occasionally one of them said something small and factual. The coffee machine in the corner takes quarters. The television is playing something with the sound off. It's raining outside, and the other responded in kind, and it was the most companionable silence she had experienced in years. The surgeon came out at 4 in the afternoon and said Micah had done very well. Imani closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, Lucian was looking at her with the real expression. "Go," he said quietly. She went. Micah was groggy and pale, and had a tube in his arm and complained, within 6 minutes of being coherent, that the pillow was too flat. She sat beside his bed and held his hand the one without the tube and thought about the glow-in-the-dark stars on his bedroom ceiling that she had never taken down and would not take down now. "Did it work?" he said. "It worked." He was quiet for a moment. "For real?" "For real." She squeezed his hand. The surgeon said, "Very well." He nodded. His eyes were heavy. "Good," he said, "because I have a lot of basketball to catch up on." She laughed. It came out slightly broken at the edges, which she allowed. "Sleep," she said. "Is the Graves guy outside?" She looked at the door. "Probably. He stayed the whole time?" "Most of it." Micah was quiet for a moment on the edge of sleep. "He's not as weird as I thought," he said. "High praise," she said. He was asleep in under 2 minutes. She sat beside him for another hour. She watched his breathing even, steady, the breathing of someone whose body was doing the work it was supposed to do, and she felt the specific, complicated relief of something you have carried so long that you've stopped being able to feel the weight of it, and then you set it down, and your body doesn't know what to do with its own hands. She had been carrying Micah since she was 25. She had been carrying the dialysis and the bills, and the insurance fights, and the careful management of her own fear, so that he would never have to see it. She had been carrying the number in her savings account that was never enough. She had been carrying the specific exhaustion of a person who has no one to share the weight with because there is no one left. She sat beside his bed and let herself feel all of that. Not the fear anymore, just the weight and the absence of it, and the strange, disorienting lightness of having arrived somewhere she had not let herself fully believe she would. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday in late spring. Imani had spent the previous 2 weeks in a particular kind of limbo, aware of the approaching date, watching her own internal weather about it, with the careful attention she applied to most things, and not arriving at any clean conclusion. She had moved most of her personal things back to her apartment 2 weeks earlier. Not all of them. 3 items had remained on the desk in her suite at the estate without her making a deliberate choice about them, which she recognized as its own kind of information. She went to Lucian's office on Tuesday morning with the engagement ring in her hand. He was at his desk. He looked up when she entered, and his gaze went immediately to her hand, the ring in her palm, rather than on her finger, and something in his face did the adjustment she had come to know. The controlled register of a man who is managing his own response before it can manage him. She crossed to the desk. She set the ring down between them. He looked at it. "The contract is complete," she said. "Every term. You kept every promise." "I know," he said. "Micah's care is secured through the recovery protocol. The attorneys have everything documented." She kept her voice even. "You did what you said you would do." "Yes." He was looking at the ring. And you did considerably more than either of us expected. She was quiet for a moment. The USB evidence, she said. Voss's case is going to take years. Yes. And the legitimate companies, the board structure is stable? Stable and growing. A pause. Without Warren, there are gaps. But they're honest gaps. I know what I have and what I don't. He looked up from the ring to her face. Imani. She waited. I'm not going to offer you anything, he said. Not a new contract. Not a revised arrangement. Nothing with terms or compensation or legal structure. He held her gaze. I'm not capable of making a clean, unpracticed version of this, so I'll just say it plainly. I don't want you to leave. She looked at him. I know what that costs you to hear from me specifically, he said. Given how this started, given everything I asked you to do and be and navigate. I know the weight of it. He was still, but it would be dishonest not to say it. She stood on the other side of the desk from him and looked at the ring between them and thought about the ballroom floor and the contract and the 42nd floor and the freight terminal and 6 hours in a plastic chair and 15-year-old telling her the Graves guy wasn't as weird as he thought. She thought about Warren. She had told Lucian about the personnel file she'd found on the USB, and Lucian had looked at it for a long time and then had made sure Warren's attorney received a copy, not for Warren's benefit, exactly, but because Lucian Graves had decided that the people who had used good and bad people alike as instruments deserved to have their methods completely exposed, and that included what they'd planned to do to the man who'd helped them. Warren had sent Imani a letter, 3 sentences. He said she was the most dangerous person in any room she had ever been in, and that he wished he had understood that before he had given anyone cause to use it against him. She had read it once, put it away, and not taken it out again. She thought about all the things Lucian had built, and the cost of building them, and the cost of dismantling the parts that needed to go. He had spent 3 months restructuring the pieces of his operation that lived in the gray and darker places, methodically and without announcement, because he had decided, and she had watched him decide it, incrementally, in the real office, where he actually worked, that the architecture of fear was not something he wanted to maintain anymore. Not because it had failed, because he had looked at what it produced, and decided he didn't want to be its product. She reached across the desk. She picked up the ring. She held it in her palm for a moment, looking at it. The dark stone, the transmitter in the band that had saved her own life in a freight terminal. Then she looked at Lucian. I have conditions, she said. Something shifted in his expression, not relief. Something more complex and quieter. Tell me, he said. I go where I want. I work if I want. I am not managed, positioned, or decided about without being part of the decision. Agreed. If I think you're wrong, I tell you. Directly. In private when possible, immediately when necessary. Expect nothing else at this point. And Micah gets the room over the east wing when he's recovered enough to visit. He said the view of the lake is better there, and he's right. The corner of Lucian's mouth moved. Agreed. She looked at the ring in her palm one more time. She put it back on her finger, not on the left hand. Not the engagement positioning, just on her hand. Her choice of finger, her choice of hand. She looked at how it sat there and decided she liked it. Lucian looked at her hand. One more thing, she said. He raised his eyes to her face. You walked across a ballroom for a stranger, she said. I know there were other reasons. I know the contract made sense for you, in ways that had nothing to do with me. But you also walked across that room when 300 other people stood still. She met his eyes. That mattered. I want you to know it mattered. He was quiet for a moment. Real quiet, the underneath of him. You got up off the floor, he said. In front of all of them. You stood up. A pause. That mattered first. She nodded once. She moved toward the door. Brooks, he said. She stopped without turning. Are you staying for dinner? She thought about Gloria, who would have started something at 4 o'clock in the kitchen that smelled of something real. She thought about the lake view from the dining room. She thought about what it felt like to sit in a room and not be managing anything, not performing anything, not carrying anything heavier than a conversation. Yes, she said. 1 year later, Micah ran onto a basketball court in Evanston on a Saturday afternoon in October. and the sound he made when his feet hit the hardwood, a short, involuntary sound of pure physical joy, was the single best thing Imani had heard in 3 years. She was in the bleachers. She was wearing her own jacket, her own shoes, her own face, the one she'd always had. She cheered loud enough that 2 people in front of her turned around, and she did not lower her voice. Lucian was beside her. He was not a man who attended basketball games by nature. He sat in the bleachers of a high school gym in October, with the particular quality of someone who is in an unfamiliar environment and has decided, without announcing it, that the environment is fine. Micah went up for the first jump ball of the game, and he got it. And Imani made a sound that she would have been embarrassed by in any other context, and was not embarrassed by here. Lucian looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was watching her brother move across a basketball court, with both kidneys working and his whole life in front of him, and her face was entirely open, no management, no performance, no surface carefully maintained for the benefit of a room. Just Imani, watching Micah run. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't look at him. She laced her fingers through his and squeezed once, briefly, and then kept watching the game. They sat like that for the rest of the first half, in a high school gym in October, while the world continued in its enormous, indifferent way outside, and a 15-year-old who had spent 14 months with a tube in his arm played basketball, and the woman who had never stopped fighting for him sat in the bleachers, whole and loud and unapologetically present, and let herself be exactly where she was. The woman who had lain on a ballroom floor and heard music stop and felt 300 people look at her and do nothing she had not needed saving. She had needed a moment, one single unguarded moment, to show the world what she already was. She'd taken it. And Lucian Graves, who had once built a life on the principle of having nothing to lose, held her hand in the bleachers of a gym in October and understood, in the specific, irreducible way that certain truths arrive only through living, that the strongest thing he had ever done was learn to hold on.